Hello everybody. Today we are going to be taking a look at the Fate of Finland DLC, one of the first DLCs to come out in the game. It has, obviously, a lot of Finnish stuff in it, but it also has some fairly unique Soviet divisions as well. It is overall a DLC that I would say is not exactly the most competitive in terms of like power level, but obviously if you want to play with either Finnish stuff or you just want some very different divisions, this can be a very solid DLC to pick up. Not to mention it also comes with a piece of single player content in the campaign, but also it is the only DLC with maps, which makes it kind of one of the most important DLCs to pick up. I will mention that you can also get this DLC by buying it in the History Pass, which contains two other DLCs alongside it in Death on the Vistula and the Black Sunday DLC. If you're going to pick up this DLC, I highly recommend the History Pass, but anyway, let's go ahead and just jump into the DLC division reviews. The Finnish Armored Division, whose name I'm not even going to try to pronounce, is fairly interesting in how it kind of works. Unlike a lot of armored divisions, due to the nature of how Finnish infantry are, you actually have a surprisingly strong CQC-based tab with lots of options. The Jakari are pretty notable as a very solid and spammable CQC unit alongside things like double flamethrower units. This is combined with access to plenty of cheap armor such as T-28s and numerous cards of T-26s to give the Finnish Armored a different flavor. It's not as much of a long-range powerhouse, only having very limited options in engaging at long range. A single card of T-3485s, a couple cards of Stug 3s, a single ISU 152, and some Pack 40s. It is probably the most well-rounded Finnish division in Fate of Finland, having just actual tanks while being able to rely on, like that infantry that Finland is kind of known for in-game. On top of that, this division also does have a fairly large air tab, although the options are not exactly the strongest out there, many of them being relatively slow and having limited payloads, even though they do sport very high availability overall. I would say that the Finnish Armored Division works best in a 1v1 scenario on a more aggressive income, where weaknesses such as a limited anti-air or artillery tab doesn't matter that much. As long as you don't really go into team games where there's not much here that really stands out, the Finnish Armored Division can be a decently capable division that spams light armor alongside good CQC and is just a fairly unique armored division. Rhyma Raappana is quite the unique division. As an infantry-based division, it obviously lacks armor, but this is one of the more severe divisions, with only a handful of light vehicles serving as its only armored options. On top of that, an AT tab that is kind of anemic with just a handful of 45mm and 50mm guns, pretty much nothing that can kill anything bigger than a medium tank, means that Rhyna has to get kind of creative to find AT. Now, it can, in some ways, find some AT with things like its M30 howitzers, or by, more likely, gaining access to its air tab, where plenty of AT tank-busting planes and bombers exist. Rhyna is essentially well known for being an air spam division, and with a very large and cheap air tab, the goal of Rhyna is generally to overwhelm enemy anti-air capabilities by slowly amassing more and more planes as the game goes on. Its infantry is also worth mentioning, as it is a very solid mix of the specialized CQC that Finnish infantry are known for, while also having at least a couple cards of things like Kavari, which give you some longer range infantry to make use of. Also worth mentioning, the CC in the Recon tab makes it a very strong tab with a lot of snipers and overall pretty capable squads. Still, though, Rhyna is a division that really only works in 1v1, where you can actually beat people's anti-air. If you go in the team games, there's generally just too much anti-air for Rhyna to do much of anything, so this is purely a 1v1 division. On top of that, don't expect amazing results. Rhyna has some real gaps in its capabilities, and you need to be very good at leveraging your infantry and air tab to get any work done. It's a tough battle, and the division is generally seen as kind of not meta, but more so a fun pick that definitely has a very unique playstyle. The 122nd Infantry is a mixed German-Finnish division. Finding sprinklings of Finnish options in various tabs, the core of the 122nd remains a largely German infantry division style. The infantry tab is definitely one of the more unique elements of it, containing the aforementioned Finnish infantry in it, alongside several cards of Sturmgrenadiers, which are STG armed squads, and the result is that the 122nd has above average CQC compared to a lot of regular German divisions. However, it loses points by having only Grenadiers as its base long-range infantry, which they're not exactly outstanding. Many of the other tabs have kind of basic options as well. You have a lot of Stugs in the tank tab. Support is capable enough with some solid options like IG-33s and Stu-42s, but this is all pretty generic German stuff. Anti-tank does have a pretty decent roster as well, with light AT, heavier AT, and even PaK-43s serving as like your super anti-tank guns. And then you also have kind of generic tabs after that. Anti-air is functional, artillery is pretty basic with just 150s as the main thing, and then a air tab that can go relatively deep, but is mostly just Focke-Wulf and Stuka bombers. Overall, it is a division that, again, is mostly a 1v1 division if you play it. Team games can maybe be a bit easier to do since you have heavy AT and can rely on a bit more artillery in order to make up for weaknesses elsewhere. But it's still just a division that it's kind of hard to recommend playing it unless you specifically want Finnish and German stuff in one division. It's just kind of generic, and stuff like 78th Strum and Graphartnik in the base game kind of offer similar things, but with even greater rosters. Maneuver Group Viborg is a Soviet tank division that more or less has a very blunt brute force method of how it wins. It has access to a very large and diverse armor roster, including a lot of IS-2s. It backs this up with large, capable bombers and numerous cards of both off-map and 300mm Andriusha rocket launchers. Now, this power is tempered by one simple fact. This infantry tab is small and pretty garbage. You have two cards of line infantry in here, only one of them is double LMG and it's phase locked to A, and otherwise you were relying on essentially crappy filler Chernos and CQC troops to make up your numbers. Now, granted, those Chernos, now that they have a DP, because they only got it in the last patch, has made Viborg a bit more well-rounded. It can actually kind of hold its own. But regardless, Maneuver Group Viborg is still very much a team game division, where you are able to make use of IS-2 spam alongside spamming off-map and rocket launchers in order to overwhelm people and compensate for your limited infantry roster. It is a really powerful division there. Maybe not one of the top ones, as it does lack 2-kilometer HE, but outside of that one thing, Viborg sits there with many of the other heavyweight divisions. In 1v1, you would have to build this in a very aggressive way, lean very heavily on the high CQC power, and some very aggressive plays to overwhelm before the game goes long. But if you're looking for a team game division, Viborg is here, and it is pretty good. The 358th Rifles is, I think, best described as sort of like an improved and fixed version of the 184th Rifles from the base game. Both have a lot of similarities to each other. They have generally larger infantry tabs, back it up with a lot of cheap armored support, although they lack a lot of heavy tanks, and instead compensate that lack of heavy armor with the ISU 122. However, I think 358 overall has a better balance of these different tabs that makes it more capable overall. The infantry tab is smaller, but has the amazing Grupa Zakadhici, which are essentially one of the best CQC squads in the game, having essentially 2 FG-42s, 5 Samoys, and a flamethrower. Like, it's pretty much about as good of a CQC squad as you can find in the game. On top of that, they have plenty of double LMG infantry that makes a well-rounded tab overall. On top of that, it has the superior ISU 122S, meaning that it has just better heavy tank capabilities. And on top of that, its air and artillery tab are overall much more impressive, sporting some very heavy-duty artillery, such as some captured Morzer 18, alongside ML20s and various other options. Then the air tab caps it all off with the TU-2, which is an amazing bomber with high durability and good payloads. Overall, 358 I think is a division that can actually work in both team games and in 1v1 depending on how you build it. Lean aggressively for 1v1 where your superior CQC can win, and in team games lean on spamming ISU 122s alongside air and artillery to overpower people. It's a fairly capable division, although it's definitely not like a top tier Soviet one either. The 126th Mountain Corps is a division that is somewhat unique as being maybe one of the first real phase-locked divisions. And what that means is essentially several of its powerful tools are locked until a certain phase, notably the KV-85 and the ISU-152, both of which can only be brought in Phase C. The result is that the 126th Mountain Corps kind of wants to be a balanced division, so it can grind the game out until Phase C, where that heavy armor can come in, and you can start overwhelming people with it. Now, the 126 does also obviously have other strengths, most notably the infantry tab, where its bulky squads armed with numerous LMGs alongside many very cost-efficient CQC squads makes the tab just overall really good, even though it is fairly different than your standard Soviet division. Regardless, it is just able to be built in a way that is just large in how you take it, and you can definitely play a very grindy attritional battle with it. The rest of the tabs kind of vary, and you're definitely going to struggle in the earlier phases, largely relying on a handful of AT guns to make up most of your AT work outside of some lighter tanks. But if you can survive, the Phase C stuff is very powerful. I will also draw note to the air tab where, although it is not the best air tab, the Hurricanes are not exactly great tank busters, they are important to give you that little bit of extra tank busting capability to get you through those early phases. It's a division that is kind of weird in its position, as in team games it does have a lot of infantry and it does have some real heavy armor to draw on, but it lacks kind of an artillery and some other things that can make it a bit lighter. I'd say it's kind of a middle of a pack division. You can take it in either team games where you grind with infantry and then get some powerful armor, or you can take it into 1v1 and kind of do the same thing. Just don't be too greedy when you do a 1v1 battle. And with that, our DLC review comes to an end. Overall, it is a very interesting mix of divisions, as I mentioned before, and Overall, I would again recommend that if you're going to buy this DLC, pick it up in the History Pass, where you get the most bang for your buck. You can find the deck codes for the lists shown in this video down in the description, and while you're down there, make sure to also like and subscribe to not miss out on any other DLC reviews or any other Steel Division 2 content. If you have watched all the way to the end of the video, I want to thank you so much for watching. Again, make sure to keep an eye out because we will also be doing more DLC reviews and slowly work our way through the entire DLC catalog that Steel Division 2 has. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a good day.